Okay. Hello, and welcome to the webinar series on State Wildlife Action Plan revision. Good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining this webinar on Landfire and State Wildlife Action Plans. I'm Mary Fasco with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. I'm going to start out with a bit of housekeeping and then provide some background on wildlife action plans and why Landfire is so relevant to them. And then we'll hear from Henry Bastian with an overview on Landfire. And at 1:50, Jimmy Gregg and Joel Toohey will demonstrate how they used Landfire in the Utah Wildlife Action Plan. Then at 2:20, Jim Smith will be providing a brief live demo of the program so you can get visually familiar with the program. And then we'll open it up for questions. But we've got more than 50 people on this call, and it's a mix of Wildlife Action Plan coordinators, federal agencies, NGOs, who would be potential partners in incorporating Landfire into the plan. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background on the action plans and action plan revision to get everyone on the same page. All U.S. states and territories have a wildlife action plan. And taken together, these plans are the nation's blueprint for all species of wildlife. And they're plans of action for the entire state. So that's inclusive of federal land, private land, etc. And that's why they're developed and implemented in partnership with other federal land management agencies and organizations and the public. The plans are required to be reviewed and revised at least every 10 years. So the first deadline for revision is October 1st, 2015. That's almost exactly 2 years from now. So some states have chosen to revise early, and 6 of them already have approved revised plans. And they include Wyoming, Nevada, Arizona, Kentucky, Nebraska, and Florida. A few other states are about halfway through their revision, but most states and territories are in the beginning stage. And we're using this revision process as an opportunity to make these plans even better. And as part of that effort, AFWA is offering this series of webinars to assist them with their revisions. This is the first one in that series, and they'll be occurring monthly through near the revision deadline of October 2015. So that'll be about 20 webinars. And they're always going to be on Thursdays from 1 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And they'll include a variety of topics to address the 8 required elements of the plans and help them do even better conservation. So why Landfire? Landfire is an excellent tool for wildlife action plans. First and foremost, Landfire helps fulfill required elements numbers 2 and 5 of the wildlife action plans. Element number 2 requires states to describe the extent and condition of key habitat types. Landfire provides quantitative models of vegetation succession and disturbance, which mathematically and textually describe all major U.S. ecological systems. But it's that second part of the required element, the describing the condition of the habitats, that was one of the more difficult requirements to meet. Because there are programs out there that help describe the extent of habitats, but not the condition. And that's where Landfire comes in. It meets both parts of element number 2, and it's unique in that. And the more states that use it, that part of their plans will be compatible with each other, enabling them to do better landscape level conservation. Landfire also helps states meet required element number 5. Element number 5 requires states to monitor species in their habitats, monitor the effectiveness of conservation actions, and adapt actions to new and changing conditions. Landfire describes changes in habitats over time. It's updated frequently, every 2 years, and provides current and future conditions. And in Utah, Landfire helps meet the requirement of working with partners. The Nature Conservancy provides a huge amount of expertise for incorporating Landfire into the Utah Wildlife Action Plan. And Landfire itself is a product of partnerships. U.S. Geological Survey, U.S. Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, other partners such as NatureServe. So another reason why Landfire is such a useful tool is that it is wall-to-wall. It provides complete geospatial layers through the entire U.S. and the territories. And it was developed using consistent methods and ground truth across the entire country. So this is a tool that can be used by every state and territory, and therefore provide that consistency in habitat descriptions across state boundaries. It would allow plans to talk to each other. And that's something we've been hearing from the state fish and wildlife agencies and their partners, is that they're going to use the Wildlife Action Plan revision process as a way to create more consistency with their neighboring states. That means things like using consistent criteria to identify species of greatest conservation need, or using common taxonomies for species, threats, and actions, things like that. Because the degree to which plans are consistent with each other, the better they can be rolled up on the regional level, the better they can address landscape level threats, and the more accessible they will be to partners. And because Landfire was developed using consistent methods and covers the entire country, it's something every state and territory can use to work toward consistency. So a goal of this webinar is to help states meet their requirements, but also enhance conservation and bring together the strengths of their conservation partners. Something to keep in mind is that the name Landfire makes it sound like it's just an application to address fire, but it's not. It's completely adaptable to non-fire applications. Its suite of tools, models, and digital map layers is the first complete, nationally consistent collection of resources with an ecological foundation that can be used across several disciplines. It includes current vegetation, vegetation structure, and quantitative models of vegetation succession and disturbance for all major U.S. ecological systems. And another benefit of Landfire is that it is current and updated frequently. Spatial layers that change over time, like vegetation and fuels, are regularly updated, and that helps to address that habitat monitoring requirement. And so now the current edition of Landfire is Landfire 2010. It's all now available. And a note about scale, Landfire was designed for landscape level analysis, but it also may be useful for smaller geographies. It just may need review and possible adjustment by local experts, and we may go into later the pixel sizes that are used. But Landfire is quality data. It brings together the best data from U.S. Geological Survey, Forest Service. It just leverages an incredibly rich suite of spatial data and vegetation models. And it's free and accessible online, ready for use almost immediately. And there is a ton of support materials, great staff devoted to it. You'll hear from some of them today, and we'll provide the links to the support material at the end of this webinar. So with that, I'll pass it on to Henry Bastian to provide an overview of Landfire. Henry oversees Landfire as a manager in the Department of the Interior's Office of Wildland Fire here in Washington, D.C., and he's also the lead for performance management for Wildland Fire. Go ahead, Henry.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm going to just change screens here and show my screen. So, can everybody see my screen now?
Yep. I can.
All right. Yes. Looks like we're ready. All right. Well, thank you again, Mary, for that introduction, and I also appreciate the brief introduction that you did on Landfire. It's good to be invited to join with you today, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. What I'm going to discuss with you today is, why was Landfire needed? What is Landfire? Get into that in a little bit more details beyond what Mary's described. How is it being updated? Mary touched on, is this just a fire program? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then last but not least, we'll talk about how are the data being used. And we'll proceed from there. So this is a map that we really like to highlight, and we use it frequently to show why Landfire was needed. But this is from the Lolo National Forest. And prior to Landfire, the forest just had some geospatial layers and coverages for their lands. And you can see on the map on the left that, outside of their administrative boundary, they had no data. Within their administrative boundary, you see a few in-holdings or a few state lands of that nature, and you can see that, patchiness. Well, the Landfires needed to come in and fill out the entire landscape. And so what you see on the right is a representation of, again, that same area, the Lowland National Forest, and you have that wall-to-wall coverage. So, national leaders recognize that data be available for the entire country and not just for, specific areas and locations. So how did Landfire start? Well, back in the fire seasons of the 80s, the 90s through 2000, identified the need for consistent data on landscapes and conditions. And the Government Accountability Office did multiple reports that went through and talked about, the need for data and having coordinated efforts. And, their reviews highlighted that land management agencies did not have adequate data. But in 2003, they also reviewed the prototype effort of Landfire, and based on their review, they saw that it was capable of producing this type of consistent national inventory data. And so Landfire has proven itself over the years as a data set to help address these GAO concerns and meet the nation's need to have a consistent wall-to-wall data set. So the title of Landfire, although it's known as Landfire, is actually Landscape Fire and Resource Management Planning Tools, and it is a multi-partner effort providing those consistent, comprehensive maps and data describing vegetation and fire and fuels across the United States. I mentioned a prototype that was in the early part of the 2000s, 2002. The prototype had great results, and in fact, the Wildland Fire Leadership Council that was guiding that effort made the decision to proceed without a final closeout, and thus began Landfire. And the principal production partners in this effort include the Department of Interior's U.S. Geological Survey. We've got the Aeros Center that you see here on the left, the Fire Lab from the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service there in Missoula, Montana, and then the Nature Conservancy. And it is supported by all of the agencies that you see below. So the basic concept behind Landfire is that it's based on existing collected ground-based reference data. In fact, one of the jokes that we have within Landfire is that we live and die by the plot, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but as you can all appreciate, having good data is very important. It incorporates existing vegetation, condition, modeling, biophysical settings. It provides linkages from the vegetation to the fuels, and it also integrates everything from remote sensing, which is kind of the backbone of the Landfire process. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. But it also includes simulation and predictive modeling and biophysical gradients. To give you a little bit of the scope of Landfire, Landfire covers the entire United States as well as the territories. And actually, the territories is a new addition here in 2010. And it's based upon Landsat data, leveraging the National Land Cover Data Set that had designed some map zones based off of Almernix classification, and then we have grouped those by these geographic areas to help facilitate the mapping across the country. And as Mary alluded to, we are just at the end now of completing an update to the data set titled Landfire 2010. To go into a little bit more detail of the products, we have a reference database. In that database, it includes all of the points and polygons that we have collected and or received. Some of those data are sensitive or proprietary, and so we do not make them public, but as you can see there in the first couple of bullets, we do provide a public reference database that is available to all users for those that contributed and said that they were comfortable with having their data shared. Landfire also creates a landscape change data set, a disturbance data set, and with that, does a bunch of integration and transition grids from those disturbances. And then a vegetation data set that includes existing vegetation type, existing vegetation cover, and existing vegetation height, as well as some environmental site potential, which is looking at vegetation, without disturbance, what the vegetation could be and could achieve, as well as some successional class database and models, and a biophysical settings layer, which includes vegetation with disturbance. And all of these data layers, from the reference data, the landscape vegetation, are related to help design and develop the fuel data, which of course fire managers are interested in, and includes what you see listed there. We also include a fire regime, a vegetation condition class data set, and then topographic data layers. And it's important to note, as you see on the screen, that not all areas or geographic areas have all of these data sets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Landfire has also done a quality assessment or agreement assessment when we did the first map back in basically 2001. It's circa 2001 data, and did this report in 2009. We aggregated, again, these map zones from the National Land Cover data set and did an accuracy or agreement assessment based on a holdout sample of plots. And you can kind of see the results there. All of this data and more details of this agreement assessment is available at the website, and we are currently working on a 2010 assessment. To go into a little bit more detail, as I mentioned, the products and the timing of those products, we started with a product called Landfire National. It was circa 2001. We completed that in 2009. We did a subsequent refresh of that to make products from 2001 consistent between a 2008, Landfire 2008 data set. And as I alluded to at the beginning, we are currently completing the Landfire 2010 update, and it's being delivered this year. And there's a time delay in this because of the need to aggregate and collect all of the remote sensed imagery from Landsat, as well as the points and polygon data that Landfire uses. But there is an effort to update it, and we'll talk a little bit more about where we're going to go in the future with this program. As I mentioned, we live and die by the plot, and a key part of Landfire is the reference database. And this just shows you that we have over 800,000 samples as part of that reference database, and the partners and contributors that have given data to Landfire. A key one, of course, that we see highlighted there is the Forest Services Inventory Analysis, FIA, but it only comprises 11% of this data. And to go into the data a little bit more, this shows you a representation of the points and the polygons. There on the left is a map that shows you the distribution of points across the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii, and again, the distribution of those greater than 800,000 plots. We also have polygons that have been contributed, and we have greater than 600,000 polygons, and again, a representation of the map that you see on the lower right there. And we are currently set up and structured with a yearly data call submission of November the 15th to collect data or provide folks an opportunity to submit data to Landfire. Just to give you a quick idea of the type of data that are contained in the reference database, you can see this distribution here of species composition, vegetation structure, some exotics data, community, and then fuels data rounding it out. As far as disturbance, and again, I apologize, there's a lot on this image, but just to show you, we are really interested in change and disturbances across the United States. And what you see here in the legend are the types of disturbances that Landfire is focused on. And from the Landfire 2008 effort, you can see the changes or the disturbances by geographic area. And again, all of this is available at the website. With that disturbance, we go through an integration process. We do a time sense disturbance, and then do some transition with the vegetation data, where vegetation is grown or modeled after that disturbance to make sure that it is updated for consistency across that area of disturbance, so that we just don't show that your existing vegetation type, cover, or height can continue in a state that it's not, because we know that it continues to grow over time. And so Landfire processes all of those disturbances and then goes through this vegetation disturbance transition process. So as part of updating, you've seen the map there of the types of disturbances. Here's just a little closer view where we look at the myriad of polygons out there on where these disturbances are occurring, from harvest to clear cuts to thinning, prescribed fires, and within those, where we have available data through remote sensing, we go through and evaluate the severity at which those locations have changed, and are able to then show that if a particular forest, for instance, had a high severity disturbance, that it would change that type, potentially change from a forest type to either a grass or a shrubland, and as well would see a change in the cover, and the height for that location. So Landfire is a voracious effort in collecting multiple data sets to ensure that it's updated. As Mary alluded to, there has been a lot of confusion about Landfire because of the title, and so what's in a name? When you first focus at Landfire, people really, I think, look at that red and they chime in on the red of fire. But Landfire is, as you've begun to understand, more than just about fire, and it has a lot more to provide users. And we'll now explore a few examples of the land side of Landfire and how data have been applied. I want to quickly just come back to the products, because we cannot get to the fire products without the land side of the products, and so everything from the reference data, the change data, the vegetation data are key, and that's why it's definitely more than just a fire data set. So a few applications. I'm going to first start out with the fire application. There's everything from our National Wildland Fire Cohesive Strategy, a program called the Fire Program Analysis, which is a prioritization and allocation system. We've got a hazardous fuels prioritization and allocation system that deals with our fuels program. And then last but not least, the Wildland Fire Decision Support System. And the example that you see here on the screen is from the Wildland Fire Decision Support. What this is a model. It's called Fire Spread Probability, or FSPRO, and it models a fire ignition on the landscape and then gives the probability that the fire will reach a given location on the landscape based upon the Landfire data, the terrain, the weather. All of those variables are computed to determine the probability that will reach that spot. So you can see this representation here from fire. Also in the lower section here, you see two wildlife, or an insect example as well. One is a bighorn sheep analysis that was done on the Payette National Forest, and another one of a bee pollination study in California. And these folks, were out looking. They wanted an extensive data set, and because Landfire covered that large landscape of an area that they were concerned and interested in, they chose Landfire. And their results show that it was very helpful in their analysis and identifying what they were looking for. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail of an example beyond these. These examples are available at the Landfire website, and many more like them. Before we do that, just want to highlight that with our partner, the Nature Conservancy, we have an interactive map called a web-hosted application map. That's the acronym for WHAM, which is kind of cute. But this map shows you areas across the nation where Landfire are being used, and you can see that it's being used everywhere across all 50 states. And it's not just a Western data set. You can see in the East that there's quite a number of applications of where Landfire have been applied. To turn a little bit more to wildlife, because that's the focus of our presentation today, I want to highlight one particularly that's of interest is greater sage grouse. And the example that I'm going to highlight is a study done by Steve Kinnick and John Conley. They looked at the ecology and conservation of the species across its entire distribution here in Western North America. And they were looking at the interaction of sage grouse with leks and sagebrush patterns. That was a core objective. The study area, as I mentioned, was across Western North America. They did a comparison between Kukler's historical vegetation and the current distribution of sagebrush from Landfire. From that, they then were able to get the general representation and percentages of the landscape that were covered and dominated by Landfire. And it was very helpful in their analysis. And from that, they went into the analysis and started looking at some of the factors of why this species is being impacted, everything from the extent of the vegetation, the habitat, the interaction from human footprints, things from energy, non-native plants grazing. They also looked at fire, so burned areas. They looked at, again, the extent of the sagebrush, fragmentation, and the complexity, with the dispersal of environmental changes. And the study found that the most significant environmental predictors relative to sage grouse and their leks and the populations was, number one, that the level of human footprint within 5 kilometers, and then the proportion of burned areas within 54 kilometers. And they chose Landfire because, as I mentioned, it covered the entire study area. It was relevant to sage grouse ecology, and it was at appropriate scale and resolution. And ultimately, kind of the bottom line just for you, but I'd encourage you to go read the publication itself to get all the details. But ultimately, the population declines, as they've found, was because of suitable sage grouse or sagebrush habitat and the loss of that habitat across the district, that area. Where does Landfire go into the future? We've got an updated website. We've talked about our 2010 product available this year. We're currently planning for a 2012 update and thinking about a 2014 update. And we're looking forward to a potential wall-to-wall remap in 2015-2016 based upon new satellite imagery from Landsat 8 and incorporating new data, improved gradients, and updated algorithms. It's important to note that we've got some key partners. As I mentioned, FIA is one. We've been working with the Gap Analysis Program, actually working on a memorandum of understanding where we're going to coordinate more on our data and funding, as well as NAS, which is the National Agricultural Statistics Service, provides some important data relative to agricultural lands. And we have been working with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, who have done a pilot to use their National Resource Inventory data, and we're working towards an agreement now on that. And then, of course, underlying all of this is the Multi-Resolution Land Consortium and the partnership we have with the National Land Cover Data. Since we're talking about state wildlife action plans, you've got your website. It talks about teaming with wildlife, which is the natural investment. I'd like to highlight, again, I mentioned living and dying by the plot with Landfire. We would really appreciate any data that you have, and if you're able to share data with Landfire, you can contribute data. And the way that you can do that is by going to contribute data at our website, and you can see there in that polygon that I've highlighted that we need your help collecting various types of data, principally polygon and plot data, but we also welcome feedback on any of the Landfire products, and would love to team with you as a data investment. And last but not least, I just want to highlight that Landfire is available. This is our website that shows we have a help desk, and you can contact us at any time with any questions that you have. And that's all that I have. So we'll go back to you, Mary.
Great, thank you, Henry. And I love that, teaming with Landfire, a data investment. Very cute and very informative. And now we'll hear a case study about how Landfire was used to meet required elements of the Utah Wildlife Action Plan. You'll hear first from Jimmy Gregg. Jimmy has been the Wildlife Action Plan coordinator with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources since 2008. And before that, he helped develop and implement Florida's 2005 Wildlife Action Plan. After Jimmy, you'll hear from Joel Toohey. Joel is Director of Conservation Science for the Utah chapter of the Nature Conservancy, where he covers science, planning, natural resources, and public lands issues. This is really cool stuff y'all are about to see, so prepare to get excited. Go ahead, guys.
Okay, so this is Jimmy Gregg. I'm going to kick this off a little bit, try to effect a transition between what we've seen and what Joel's going to present. So as Mary noted, I'm the State Wildlife Action Plan Coordinator for Utah. Mary's called us together because, you know, lots of us are facing the same challenge of reviewing and revising our wildlife action plans. And I guess the thinking is maybe we can help each other get through this. So I'm going to share a little bit about how we're doing it. The way we're tackling revision here is we start with a chartered team evenly comprised of the State Wildlife Agency staff on the one hand and partners and stakeholders on the other. We call this our Wildlife Action Plan Joint Team because it's a joint endeavor. This joint team approves, directs and approves by consensus if possible and by vote if needed, the work of a number of subcommittees. So often these subcommittees are tasked by a required element. For example, we had an Element 2, or Key Habitat Subcommittee. That committee was led by Joel Toohey, who will shortly be presenting his team's work. And the important thing to point out here is, you know, what Joel will be describing is a huge evolution from what was done with our first action plan. And my hope is that many of the other second-generation wildlife action plans will also make a huge evolution away from how things were done the first time around. And that's really my motivation for volunteering here today. So just to set the stage, one of the major implementation challenges of the Utah Action Plan communities experienced over the last 8 years is that our 2005 plan lacked benchmarks and measures for the condition of our key habitats. Consequently, we didn't establish any measurable goals and objectives for the condition of our key habitats. And because we never really said what we meant to accomplish, we never laid down a timeline or a price tag for whatever it was that we hoped to accomplish. And so our rather extensive habitat management program was sort of gutterballed into a project-driven mode of operation. And it just kind of rolled along very successfully, gaining partners and recognition and lots of funding. However, with the recent national austerity craze, we're now being asked some pointed questions from policymakers at both the state and federal levels. These questions, you know, they include such familiar themes as what are we getting for our investment? How much more money do you need? Are you making any progress? And how do you know? So this has all been a bit awkward for where I sit in my agency, as the Wildlife Action Plan is administratively housed in our habitat section. And in our 2005 action plan, we said, you know, flat out, that we were going to take a habitat approach to keeping common species common. And I know many states said the same thing. So, you know, I just ask you, how can we describe our performance, our success, when we never established where we started? You know, we never benchmarked that. It's hard to quantify. You know, we never really said where we intended to go. Just with words, we did, but not really numbers. And we certainly, it's hard to describe where we're at right now. We can say what we've done. I think we all are pretty comfortable talking about that. So in our case here in Utah, since 2006, we've spent about $135 million to treat about 1 million acres, almost half of which was sagebrush, you know, harkening back to Henry's example. But we can't really say much about what we got in terms of habitat outcomes or you know, the wildlife population performance that you expect to get from that. So I don't want to sound like we're not proud of what we've done. We are. We're proud. We're very proud of that. But you know, it's time. We're deeply engaged in our action plan review, and as part of that review, you know, we're just trying to soberly, responsibly assess and synthesize what's working and what we need to improve. So the mistakes of the past are just that. You know, they're in the past. We just don't intend to repeat them. So now Joel's going to show you what we're doing here to make sure of that. So Joel, over to you.
Thanks, Jimmy. As Jimmy mentioned, I'm with the Nature Conservancy in Utah, and for about the past year or so, Jimmy and I have been working together pretty closely on the 2015 revision of Utah's Wildlife Action Plan. I have been leading the sub-team or subcommittee for the habitats part of that plan, Element 2. And I like to begin presentations or meetings my purpose here is to explain in a nutshell or an overview of the work of that committee, what we've done so far, and maybe some previews of what we hope to accomplish for that revision. I like to begin presentations with a simple, clear statement of what it is we're aiming at, our purpose, so to speak. And for this presentation, that purpose may be stated pretty clearly in the pale yellow text box that you can see at the top of the page. This is Wildlife Action Plan Element 2 language that requires describing the extent, which is a synonym for location, and the condition of these things called key habitats. In order to do that, we first needed to identify a full inclusive set of all habitats for the state of Utah, from which we would then draw these things called key habitats as a subset. Given our situation of low financial resources and short time frame, probably not unlike many other states in the same boat, we opted to evaluate several existing sets of habitats and then select the one best suited to our purpose, which again up here is the extent and condition of key habitats. The columns in the table that you see on the screen here, these four, are predefined sets of habitats, among which Landfire is one. And then the rows in the table that I won't highlight are selection factors, factors we use for evaluating these habitat sets to best meet our purpose. Among the selection factors are things from the AFWA best practices for wildlife action plans, and these are things Mary mentioned near the top of the show. Consistency, standardization, not only within a state but beyond, regionally or better nationally. Toward the bottom of this list of selection factors are a couple that are related to extent, in other words, location. If we're going to get extent, the data have to be in a spatial format. And not only that, this again was emphasized by Mary, they have to be spatial data consistent border to border, wall to wall, throughout a whole state, our whole state. And then the final selection factor has to do with condition, both current and future condition. In other words, the ability to detect change over time with various new versions or refreshes of Landfire data over time. The arrows in the body of this table are the results of our evaluation. Basically, up means good, down means bad, and sideways means we either didn't know or it was not clear which it was. Among the four candidates, only the Landfire column has all of the arrows either sideways or up. In other words, no serious flaws. All the other candidate data set columns had at least one serious flaw, one down arrow or more. And notice that in the selection factor row for condition at the bottom, Landfire is the only one that was adequate in our judgment for the whole state and everywhere in the state. So we decided to use Landfire as the basis for defining our whole set of habitats, from among which the key habitats would later be identified. So from the Landfire website, we downloaded 2 data products. Remember that big list that Henry showed twice? We downloaded 2 specific products from the Landfire website for the whole state. I won't show you how we did that because that demonstration actually follows me. For determining extent and condition, we needed to obtain the products that I've put here in abbreviated ways. BPS is the biophysical setting, and what I've called veg class is what Landfire calls succession class. There is some synonymy here, but they're the same thing. So I'm going to switch to a file now that gives what I hope will be a brief and succinct definition of these 2 concepts, biophysical setting and then what I will hereafter call vegetation class. This first slide is the concept of biophysical setting. I'll let you skim the text. I won't read it verbatim, but I'll make a couple of points of emphasis. First, biophysical settings are physical abiotic units. Each of them expresses a particular dominant type of vegetation, but inherently biophysical settings are not units of existing vegetation. Biophysical setting names can be long and unwieldy from the National Vegetation Classification System, but they're the common things you see traveling around. They're not mysterious. Biophysical settings are sites that support, say, ponderosa pine woodlands, or sites that support aspen mixed conifer forests, or Wyoming big cedar shrublands, or elsewhere in the country maybe a certain type of prairie or a certain type of hardwood forest, for example. So they're the common things you see. And this map here, even though it is clipped to the boundary of a National Forest Ranger District, the data do extend beyond that line. This is not like Henry's Lolo example. The data are border-to-border, wall-to-wall everywhere. And this demonstrates that the Landfire data allow us to meet the extent criterion, or the extent requirement of the element 2 language. So these are the biophysical settings. The companion concept, called vegetation class, I'll let you again skim the text here, which I won't read fully. But the important point is the smallest printing in the whole slide. The vegetation class label or attribute is meaningless unless it is associated with a biophysical setting. So by itself, it has no meaning. It has to be associated with that site, that setting. Vegetation classes are defined by a number of concepts. They include vegetation age or successional stage, vegetation structure, open versus closed canopy, and a third factor that we more or less call naturalness, a reference or a native condition, natural, versus something called uncharacteristic. And uncharacteristic classes, for example, are those things that might be dominance of invasive annual grasses, like cheatgrass, or shrublands where an herbaceous understory is depleted, or a former floodplain left high and dry because of stream channel downcutting. Loose synonyms for this might be pre-settlement or vegetation prior to the advent of European human settlement. So using the large body of Landfire data that we downloaded from the website, clipped to the state of Utah, each 30-meter sized pixel having both its biophysical setting identity and its vegetation class, we followed this three-step process to do our work. For step 1, to define the full set of habitats within the state of Utah, we used only the biophysical setting data from Landfire, clipped to the Utah boundary. And what I'm going to show next, this is an Excel spreadsheet. I know it's kind of eyes glaze over stuff, but this is the actual product, not a mock-up for a presentation or a screen capture, the real live file. This is an export of all the biophysical settings, BPS name, column G, and their acreages within the state of Utah. And to make it a little more usable to us, I did some reformatting where each of the full set, on the left here, column A, this is the full set of 66 biophysical settings within the state of Utah, column A. So is this list then the full set of all habitats within Utah? The answer is no, not yet. These are too finely divided and numerous to be treated individually as discrete habitats for a geographic scope of a whole state, especially Utah, 85,000 square miles. We needed to do some merging or lumping. So to do that, for simplicity and consistency, we went back to the habitats list from the original 2005 WAP here in column C, these names. And we did some, as a starting point, we made some refinements to it over here into column A. And we identified these 23 in boldface type, broadly defined, user-friendly named units as our 2015 full set of Wildlife Action Plan habitats. So you might wonder, if that's all we had to do for step 1, why did we go through that whole rigmarole of selecting the Landfire data set and exporting from it all those biophysical settings? Because these names here in column A by themselves are empty, without any usable substance, no hope of extent or condition, until we assign each of those broader names to their corresponding narrowly defined biophysical settings from among the full set of 66. So we had to match the broad and the fine levels. All 66 of these biophysical settings fit pretty well into one of the 23 habitats in column A. So column A, these are the 23 habitats. These are the finer level biophysical settings that comprise each one, and again over here their acreages in column C in the state of Utah. And then finally, this is just the list of habitats alone with their acreages in the state of Utah. So that, in a nutshell, is how we use Landfire data to define the full set of Wildlife Action Plan habitats in Utah. So then back to our three-step process from step 2, from among this full set, we developed and then used a process to pick out the key habitats from among the full set of 23. The second step does not directly involve use of Landfire data, so just hit the highlights real quick. What we did was to build what we called a multi-factor scoring machine. You could think of a sausage grinder or some Rube Goldberg device that will have each of the 23 full set of habitats within the full set run through it and given a score. And the 5 scoring factors with the Roman numerals are here: abundance, number of SG species of greatest conservation need. You can see the others: wildlife diversity, threats, value. We put them into 2 columns, left and right. The 3 factors on the left are factors based on geography and biology, and the 2 on the right are based on possible adverse impact, which was an important concept in developing the 2015 revision of the Wildlife Action Plan in our state. Then this is the summary table, the results of our going through and assigning a score of 1 to 5 for each of the 23 habitats for each of the 5 factors. The left side factors had a sum of those 3 columns to the left. The 2 right side factors also had a sum column of those 2 factors. And then this then is the raw material for operating the so-called habitats machine. Again, for the sake of time, I won't go through how we built it, but I'll show the result. We sorted the 23 habitats here on the left into descending order of their score in the left side sum column, here where I've got the cursor. And then we applied a 2-part process, or a 2-part rule seen at the top. The key habitats are those that have a left side sum across score of 10 or more, or they have a left side sum across score of 9 and a right side sum across score, factors 4 and 5, of 10. So these above the dark line on the left, these are the 11 key habitats within the state of Utah. And then those down here among the 23 are the remainder, the non-key habitats. In fact, those near the bottom are kind of like the Rodney Dangerfield habitats of Utah, at least. They just don't get no respect. And then, in summary, these are the 11 key habitats shown by themselves. The lists on the left and right are the same thing, just ordered differently. The ordering on the left is by descending order of their score, so that's kind of a rough order of their importance. And then the ordering on the right is by alphabetical order, if that is the way that some people process information better. And then not shown on this list is the habitat that for now we're provisionally calling water, flowing or standing water, rivers, lakes, streams, etc. Because open water, however we refer to it, will be a key habitat in Utah basically by unanimous consent, given that we're the second driest state in the nation. So back to our 3-part process. We've done the key habitats, we've done the full set, we've done the key habitats. Step 3 now is assessing the current condition of the key habitats. And for this we do use the Landfire data. And the measure of condition that we use is known as ecological departure. I believe in one of Henry's slides he called it vegetation condition. It used to be called fire regime condition. So there is some synonymy going on here. But we call it ecological departure to get away from the fire label. And for this calculation, for this metric, we use both the biophysical setting identity and the associated vegetation class assignment of those pixels in the data set. What you see on the screen, 3 blocks of text. The top 2 are 2 different ways of defining ecological departure. 2 different ways of saying the same thing, basically. And just to summarize quickly, ecological departure is the difference or dissimilarity between 2 things. Dissimilarity between the proportion of vegetation classes in a biophysical setting that one would expect under reference or natural conditions. The difference between that and the proportion of vegetation classes that are currently present on the landscape. And it's very important to note that this concept has meaning and can be calculated only within a specific large geographic area or polygon. Very important. So let me show an example here, a real-life example of how it works. This is from here's the long unwieldy name of the biophysical setting. If you're driving around, you would see sites that support Wyoming big sagebrush. This is from a National Forest Ranger District in Utah, so that is the polygon within which it's calculated. Here are the vegetation classes. A through E are those natural reference classes, and then U is all of the uncharacteristic lumped together. The column in light blue, called reference amount, shows the expected reference proportions of the vegetation classes. And these numbers are this sideways printing down here. That might be a little hard to read. These numbers come specifically from the building and running of Landfire reference, state, and transition models, expert knowledge that built and ran those models, from which these reference values were derived. And note that the reference percentage of uncharacteristic classes is always 0. Then the column in the light purple, headed current amount, show the actual amounts or proportions of the same vegetation classes in this National Forest Ranger District at the present time. And these numbers, the sideways printing down here in the purple, come straight from the spatial analysis exercise of clipping the Landfire data to the boundary of this large polygon and then figuring out the percentages of each biophysical setting by class pixel amount. And then the column on the right labeled similarity is merely the smaller or the minimum of the two numbers of the columns to the left. So it's the similarity between reference and current. The sum of the minimum of these, 39%, is actually the overall similarity between the two columns. So because ecological departure is a dissimilarity, we subtract from 1 or 100% to arrive at a dissimilarity or departure of 61, which is a percentage, although we don't show the percent symbol. The mathematical formula, for those who like to see such stuff, is actually shown here. The possible range of values of ecological departure is 0 to 100%, lower numbers, lower departure being generally better condition, higher numbers, higher departure being generally worse condition. And this range is traditionally broken into 3 classes that can be color-coded, like a stoplight, for purposes of visual display, where green, yellow, and red, respectively, can be thought of as being in good, fair, or poor condition. And I believe there was a picture or two in Henry's presentation that showed the whole country with green, yellow, and red. That would be similar to this scheme here for breaking departure into 3 different classes. So that's the concept of departure in what I hope was a clear explanation with user-friendly visuals, because we're going to go back to the real world again here quickly. This spreadsheet also is real live stuff, the real thing, not a mock-up. This is actual exported Landfire data for certain sagebrush biophysical settings in Utah. Here are their names over here to the right: mixed low sagebrush, basin big sagebrush shrubland, etc. And I did some rearranging of these table contents, again, to make a more user-friendly version, where we see that we have the biophysical settings, column A. We have the polygons in which the departure calculations are done. In this case, we used HUC 8-digit HUC watershed polygons with their names here in column C. And then look here. This block, which is repeated, each 6-row block, this looks very much like the example I just showed for Wyoming big sagebrush, even down to the color coding of the blue and the purple and the minimum, etc. Except that here the departure number and its class are shown off to the right instead of underneath. So there's one constraint I'll mention in passing, and that this ecological departure calculation using Landfire data can be done only at the finer level of the biophysical setting. It cannot be done reliably at the broader level of those 23, or in this case 11, Wildlife Action Plan key habitats. Those are aggregations of biophysical settings. And the reasons are kind of technical, and I won't go into them here, but if anyone wants to know, I can explain that offline later. You'll have my contact information. And by the way, that constraint is not really a serious flaw of the method. It's just more of a mapping or a display issue that we can overcome. So we in Utah believe that this, what you see on the screen, will satisfy the Wildlife Action Plan Element 2 language, in other words, the letter of the law, regarding extent and condition of key habitats in our state. We're aware that critical review of what you've seen, this method, could likely expose some weaknesses, but we will live with those weaknesses, because to have gotten this far with free off-the-shelf Landfire data is pretty remarkable in our climate of both low financial resources and short time frame available for revision. So as a closing analogy for this part, I have one little add-on at the end, but for a closing analogy, I'll offer a quote from former British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill. He said, "It has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except all the others that have been tried. So bringing that idea into this presentation, what you've seen here with some of its quirks and shortcomings is the worst way to assess extent and condition of WAP key habitats in Utah, except for all the other methods we could have used. So in the remaining time, what I'd like to do is show another aspect of the data in this table you see here that may be even more useful in the long run than just meeting the letter of the law of Wildlife Action Plan revision. We believe, and we hope you agree, that a revised Wildlife Action Plan is useless unless it guides partners to take action. In other words, to do things toward the specific objectives of the Wildlife Action Plan itself. Ecological departure is just a measure of condition, and that single number, in this case 76.5, etc., is an integrated measure that tells a person little about why that departure is high or low without investigating further. In this regard, the ecological departure metric is kind of like Velveeta or Spam. It's a single thing, but its ingredients or contents may be a mystery at first glance. This data table on the screen, however, has the ingredients for digging deeper, not only to explain reasons why a particular departure number may be high or low, but ingredients actually for strategizing about doing action. So I want to show in the next 3 minutes or so in a final example of that. Back to our user-friendly example of ecological departure, Wyoming big sagebrush. Notice this conifer or encroached class, class E in the reference state. This is an example, a picture of what that looks like on the ground. Pygmy conifers of Utah, juniper primarily. I can't tell if that's a pinyon. Let's pretend that's a two-needle pinyon pine, encroaching into the Wyoming big sagebrush stand. This is not unnatural or uncharacteristic inherently, but these pygmy conifers make excellent purchase for raptors that like to prey on greater sage-grouse. We saw the example earlier of Landfire used for greater sage-grouse habitat. Well, the raptors like to sit on the top where they get a good view and go prey on the sage-grouse. Now, because greater sage-grouse is one of the higher profile and potentially very contentious species in the western U.S. at the moment, too many raptors eating too many sage-grouse is not a good thing. So doing something to reduce juniper and pinyon encroachment into the sagebrush habitats of sage-grouse is high on the list of many, many partners. So how might the data we've just seen be helpful in this regard? So back to our data table. What I did in the next tab is I isolated only those biophysical settings in column A called this. I won't read the whole thing. This is the Wyoming big sagebrush. And then using the Excel filter function, which is not hard to learn, I displayed only, see column F, only the vegetation class E conifer encroachment. So every row in this table here is now just the conifer encroached class E information for every geographic area, Huck 8 polygon, where the Wyoming big sagebrush occurs. We can scan this filtered table to look for the polygons, the Huck 8 polygons, the rows, where the Landfire data show a large overabundance of class E at the present time compared with reference proportion. For example, let me bring your eyes down here to this one called Hamlin Snake Valleys. This just happens to be a sage-grouse management area in Utah's Greater Sage-Grouse Management Plan. And according to the Landfire data, it has a very large overabundance at the present time of this conifer encroached class. In other words, it has just under 25% of the acreage in this polygon of Wyoming big sagebrush is this conifer encroached class, where we would expect only 5% in a reference condition. 5 times as much of the conifer encroached class. So in absolute terms, given the total of 220,000 plus acres, we have over 40,000 excess acres of conifer encroached sagebrush that could be a candidate for treatment, which is actually a pretty low conflict action that would improve habitat for sage-grouse and sagebrush. We have to be careful about using broad scope, coarse scale data, like what you're seeing here, for very fine scale plans or actions. So we might best say that what you're seeing here is that Hamlin Snake Valleys would be a prime location to investigate further at the finer project scale the possibility of conifer reduction projects. And not only there, one could scan this whole table, sort the rows in descending order of these values of current class E, look for places with large overabundance and large acreage, and build a list of places that funders, partners, others in Utah might look to do projects to benefit sage grouse from conifer reduction actions. So that, at the end here, is just one quick way of using Landfire data beyond the letter of the law condition measure, in this case for broad level planning for useful actions that might be taken. So with that, that ends my presentation. I will turn the time back over to our moderator.
Thank you, Jimmy and Joel. Great stuff for wildlife action plans. Okay, now we're going to see a live demo from Jim Smith. He's going to provide a 5-minute demo of how to download Landfire products using an example from eastern states. Because as we stated, Landfire covers the U.S. wall-to-wall and is applicable to any state or territory in any region. Jim Smith is the Nature Conservancy's Landfire project lead. He was an associate professor in the forestry faculty at Virginia Tech and was director of Forest Information Systems Development for Champion International Paper Company and International Paper Company. Go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Mary. I appreciate it. And thanks to Henry and Joel and Jimmy for that description of the Landfire program and how the data sets can be used in a real application. And I'm going to talk about how you obtain all those data sets that have been mentioned before. So my role today, and I'm actually going to try to demonstrate it live, at least one particular way to get it live, and talk about a couple of others. I am with the Nature Conservancy, and I and my team are a part of the North American Region Science Team. And we're a partner in Landfire because we believe that comprehensive, rich, consistent data sets like Landfire can contribute to our organization's mission, the conservation of waters and lands on which all life depends. So that's why we're a part of this, and we commit to trying to help you and others try to access, understand, and use Landfire program products effectively. There are 3 email addresses on the screen right now, my personal email address plus a Landfire address at TNC and a help desk address for Landfire. Contact any of those if you think that you need help, and we will do our best to assist you. There are also other ways to learn about Landfire, through the websites, which we're going to go into more detail in a moment, but also through Twitter and YouTube. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of support available there, so we hope that you'll go there and then contact us when you need additional information. So let's start off by saying, how would we get Landfire data from the landfire.gov website? It's not going to be my focus today to demonstrate this, but just to give you some of the options. You heard Joel in particular talk about dynamic state and transition vegetation models and reference conditions. Well, if that's the data that you're interested in, you'll want to click on the icon in the yellow box there, the vegetation icon. And if you click on that on landfire.gov, you will find a vegetation models download link, and you can download models for individual map zones or larger areas. We call that our sort of draft ecological encyclopedia, and we hope that if you need information like that, that you'll go there to obtain it. Now, if you look at the blue arrow on the bottom left, you can't see the entire opening screen for landfire.gov, but I did capture the headings down there. Under Tools and Services, this is where you'll go to find other links to go places other than landfire.gov to obtain either tools that we think are helpful or other information that may be helpful. But I'm really going to quickly talk about this red arrow here that's pointing at an icon that we call the dynamic data distribution site. Okay, and if you click on that particular icon, you'll see something that looks like this, and this is an internet web mapping service, and I've zoomed in on an area here in the east, and I'm going to turn your attention east here a bit from the western examples that Joel and Jimmy were talking about to an area that's maybe as close to the Four Corners analogy in the east, which is where Tennessee, Virginia, Kentucky, and North Carolina all come together. And the way that this web-based data download service works is you would click on the tool, you would draw a box, you would pick over here, you would pick a layer that you're interested in, like where the white arrow is pointing. This happens to be Landfire 1.2.0, or the latest Landfire version, existing vegetation cover, and that is the percent cover by the upper layer life form. And I picked this area and this box because we actually did this exact thing for the Cherokee National Forest, which is this area right in here, to actually do a planning project with the Cherokee National Forest. So once you downloaded this data, you would then have to do a little bit of processing to get it ready to use in ArcMap. But it's a very small amount of processing that a GIS-savvy individual certainly can do. Not a GIS expert, just GIS-savvy. Again, an internet web service that you can directly download data from the landfire.gov website. But there's an option to that, and it's actually an option that I prefer, and that's why I'm going to try to demonstrate it live today, which is what we call LFDAT, or the Landfire Data Access Tool. If you had gone to that blue arrow under Tools and Services, you would see a connection there to something called nifty.gov, and that is the name of the old National Interagency Fire, Fuels, and Vegetation Technology Team, and they actually helped us create this tool. And this is going to actually be a different approach for grabbing that data, which is an approach that actually works from directly within ArcMap, an ESRI product that is ubiquitous in all the agencies, state, private, and public. Now, the current access tool that you'll see up there is actually available for ARC version 10.0, but a new version of the LFDAT tool will be available within the next 2 weeks that will work in ARC versions 10.1 and 10.2. So if you were going to use this tool, which again is my preferred option, you would go to this site, you would download the tool and the tutorials and the user guide to help you get started. Then you would install it, and you would actually see in ArcMap, and let me minimize this so that you can see better what you would see in ArcMap. You would see this extension right here added to your ArcMap document, okay? And what this is going to allow you to do is to go grab Landfire data directly from the distribution site and bring it into ArcMap very quickly and very easily. So all I've done here is I've actually opened up an ArcMap document, and I've added a generic counties and states layers into this so that you could just get some geographic context. It's not required, it's just something we do so that you can see where you're downloading very easily. This happens to be the border between South Carolina and North Carolina, and I picked this area because, well, we've done some work down in this area with the Nature Conservancy on planning on what are called the green swamp and the white swamp areas. But also when we download, I wanted to basically emphasize that Landfire data sets, whether they're vegetation models or the spatial data, do not change in concept or construction across boundaries or administrative units like states. So that's why I wanted this sort of straight line in there so that you could see that. So if you've downloaded and installed the tool, which I'm pointing out up here, and I click on this box, this tool that looks like a little dashed box, and then I just, again, draw a box on the screen, and that's going to be approximately 10,000 square miles. I wanted to use a big enough area to where you can see how it works, but not so big that we would take too long on this particular demonstration. So once you click on that and you've drawn the box, this dialog box open that allows you to select a layer, and I'm going to go through this in more detail in a moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select existing vegetation type from what we call Landfire 2010, representing landscape conditions at the end of the calendar year 2010, or version 1.2.0. And I'm going to request the download. Now we should, if all things are working, like we hope they do, get a response back from the website that says, is this what you're trying to download? Existing vegetation type? And I say yes, so I say go ahead and download, okay? And again, you'll see a request, a response come back from the server. Now I'm going to close that off for just a minute just to show you a couple of other things There are within this, every version of Landfire data that is available for download on the web can be selected here. Not just one, but all of them. Anything that's available for download will be listed here. There are also some background data sets, such as cities and towns, roads, etc., if you want those. Here is ecological subsections, if that's something you're interested in. You can select more than one if you wish. That's up to you. But as you select these, understand there is a performance issue, you know, as you ask for more data to come. Oh, and I got an error, so let's try it again. It does happen. You know, websites are not perfect. If we get an error, I will close out the live demo and go to the presentation that will show you the steps. But in web services, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, although we've had a very, very high success rate with the data services. If you encounter a problem, then we hope that you'll send an email to one of those email addresses that we gave you, and then we can investigate that problem. The amount of time that it takes to download data does depend on how big an area you pick and how many layers you ask to be downloaded. So it is trying to extract the data now. And we'll give it a moment or two to see if it actually works this time. But this is a nice tool that will help you, I think, utilize data very quickly. Well, this time it worked. So I'm going to actually save the downloaded file. Remember, that's something that you will have to learn to do, is remember where you save things. So I'm going to save it in a special folder that I actually created for this demo, but that's selectable by you. You can save it wherever you wish. You just have to remember where you saved it. Okay, so it says it's completed. So remember, I selected about 10,000 square miles. I downloaded the data. I saved it in a location that I would remember. And now I'm just going to tell it to process that data and get it ready to be used in ArcMap. So I've got to tell it where that data is, which is here, and I need to tell it where I want to save the result, which again, I created these ahead of time, which is a good practice for you to be in instead of trying to do it on the fly. So now I'm going to actually assemble the data. And this should be relatively short. This is not a large area by most measures. It's 10,000 square miles, which is significant, but not a gigantic area. There are area limits on how big an area you can download at one time, but it's pretty big. I have not run into it in quite a while. And you can see the processing was complete in less than a minute. So now I just need to add this layer to my map document. And again, you have to remember where you stored things. That's something that's up to you to do. And so I'm going to add it. I do not want to show pyramids. I don't like the black and white symbology, so I'm just going to change the symbology to make it something that I think is a little bit more instructive. So let's symbol it by EVT name. And there it is. So in less than 3 or 4 minutes, I downloaded 10,000 square miles. I'll turn the states off so you can see they don't really impact the data sets. You can't see a difference across state lines. And so now this is just an ARC data set that you can use in any way you want in as many documents as you like. Now, this was not intended to be a training presentation, but just a demo of how it works. We will be creating a couple of training demos, one for the direct internet data download site, as well as one for the LFDAT tool that we'll be posting to the YouTube, Landfire YouTube channel pretty soon. And that's what I wanted to show you.
All right.
So,
thanks, Jim. Were you finished?
I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was an excellent demo, and we look forward to the trainings on YouTube. And thanks so much to all of the speakers for your presentation on this program that can add a lot of value to the wildlife action plans. And now we're going to go through your questions. And while we do that, we are going to keep up this slide with contacts and resources. It has names and email address of all the speakers that you've heard today, including some additional ones that are involved in Landfire. It'd be very helpful for you. So I encourage you to contact them. They're all very happy to help you and answer questions. And then there are some other websites that we've compiled all together on the Teaming with Wildlife website. The link is right there. Where you can access Landfire bulletins, and Nature Conservancy has a conservation gateway on their website where you can access a lot of support and applications for Landfire. And there are several YouTube videos as well as actually really great YouTube instructional videos on Landfire. I encourage you to check those out. Okay, so questions. I got a question about whether northeastern states could use Landfire if they're going to be using the Northeast Regional Map. And just a bit of background on that, the states in the Northeast region pool some of their state wildlife grants to work on issues of regional importance. And one of their products is a map using regionally consistent habitat classifications. Can this map be used in addition to Landfire? Yes. The Northeast Regional Map can be crosswalked with Landfire. And Landfire can also provide the mapping capability that the regional classification does not. So now Henry is going to go over a few other of the questions.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a question here from Tracy. So Tracy asked, is the Landfire 2008 refresh data set that we talked about actually 2008 data or the date of refresh? And the answer to that is it represents conditions from 2008. It's not the actual date of when that project was completed. It was actually completed in 2011. And there is a delay in collecting the data, processing the satellite imagery, and producing the products. Looks like we got another question here from Katie. Katie asked, it was mentioned a few times that Landfire is for landscape level applications. She says, why is that, and what is the pixel size? Jim Smith, you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks, Henry, and thanks for the question, Katie. The pixel size for Landfire, or if you want to think of it this way, the sort of spatial granularity of the database is 30 meters, or it's about 0.22 acres per pixel. And that number basically comes from the Landsat imagery because that's the resolution of Landsat imagery, which is really a core fundamental driving data set for Landfire. Now, we should never confuse the granularity of the data set with the appropriate application scale of a data set. The way Landfire products are created, the time that's available to do it, the methods that are available that we use to be consistent across the U.S. basically create an appropriate application scale, which we would define as a large or very large landscape or larger scale. So your analyses, your anything you use, summaries, should be at that large landscape or very large landscape scale or larger, say regional, multi-states in the East in some cases. But you should be thinking about using Landfire out of the box, unadjusted. You haven't done anything to it. You just use it, probably on areas no smaller than a million pixels, or at least several 100,000 pixels, which generally relates to a very large landscape scale application. So distinguish between the granularity or resolution of the data set, 30 meters, and the application scale of the data set, very large landscape created by how those data sets were put together and created.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Looks like we got another question here from Tracy. She asks, is the vegetation cover done from ocular observations or from basal observations? And I'll take that one. It says that basically existing vegetation cover layer represents the vertical projected percent cover for the live canopy layer on that 30-meter grid sill that Jim talked about. And this existing vegetation cover is calculated and generated from the satellite imagery. And those geospatial layers are informed through plot information and training data. So let me talk a little bit more about that plot information. the percentages of tree, shrub, and herbaceous canopy cover training data are generated using plot-level, ground-based assessments. So again, that live and die by the plot that I talked about earlier. And then once those training data are developed, relationships are then established from each of those life forms between the training data and the combination of Landsat, elevation, and ancillary data. And from that, tree, shrub, and herbaceous layers are derived and has that potential range of 0 to 100%, which are then merged into these this composite layer for existing vegetation cover. Looks like we got another question from Tracy. It says, what tool do I use to determine potential fire regime for an area, say greater sage-grouse range, winter range? Fire regime groups are intended to characterize the presumed historical fire regimes within a landscape. So it's based on those interactions between vegetation dynamics, fire spread, fire effects, and spatial context. And so as far as a tool, a GIS tool would be great to just summarize that. You could clip it by a particular area, and then you could summarize fire regime groups within that area. Looks like here's another question from Tracy. She says, how do I incorporate NRCS dominant rangeland sites within Landfire current vegetation? And she kind of goes on and adds a little bit more to that. She says, within the broad polygons drawn for, say, greater sage-grouse occupied habitats, I have been using NRCS dominant rangeland sites to determine what kind of site is in a given area, and then use the current Landfire event names to see what vegetation is within the same area. I'm trying to refine that and see what within what polygon it is with the current existing veg. Well, Tracy, that's a good question. I think there's a longer detailed answer that we'd like to follow up with you on. So we'll take this question offline and we'll follow up with you on that one. Looking here, it looks like we've got a few other questions. Joseph and Ray asked, can we get access to the PowerPoints? There's some really good information. I wonder if it's going to be available to the participants. I don't know, Mary, do you want to take that question?
Sure. The recorded presentation of this webinar will be available on the Teaming with Wildlife website just as soon as it's ready. I think that'll be next week sometime. And I'll notify everybody who participated on this webinar, in addition to other people, other Wildlife Action Plan coordinators, when it is available, and I'll provide the link. And Henry's presentation is also available on the Teaming with Wildlife website. I can make mine available. The case study isn't available as a PowerPoint presentation per se because it was kind of a live demonstration, as was Jim's, but again, that can be accessed on the recording.
And Mary, if I may add, all the files I was showing were live editable Word and Excel files, and through my email address on the screen, if anybody is really interested in any of them, those can be supplied.
Oh yes, thank you. And also yours, Joel, the set of criteria for habitat sets.
Yes.
You provided me, and I can provide that to anybody who would like it.
Very good. It looks like we've got one other question, and maybe it's already been addressed with what Joel just said. Marion asked, she said, I would love to have a copy of the overall presentation, but I'm especially interested in Joel's portion. It was really helpful explanation of the use of BPS and S-class. So I think, Joel, you probably answered that because it was a combination of documents, Excel spreadsheets, and slides, and so not necessarily a canned presentation, but it sounded like you'd be willing to share that.
Very much, yes.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions, at least with what I see. Do you see any others, Mary, that you have?
No, I don't.
Okay.
So I guess that concludes this webinar. And thank you very much to all of you. And we look forward to hearing from you guys out there with your further questions of incorporating Landfire into your wildlife action plan. Thank you.